So welcome to the book club. We're recording now and we're being co-hosted with the Calgary Public Library, which I'm really honored to do. We've done a smudge, we've done a land acknowledgement, we've done a round of introductions, and we're really here to discuss the calls to action that have to do about commemoration. So I wanted to go around. Actually, our co-host is Métis, so we'll start with Katie and we'll go around. And if passes participation, Katie, because I know you're kind of working, so I don't know if you got a chance to read the calls to action. But I kind of put a list. So then Twyla, Crystal, Kat, Shelly, Jeremy, Rosemary, Heather, Julie, and Shelby. And we'll just kind of do a circle and hear what your thoughts were about what we had read. So yeah, I'll pass it off to Katie and then maybe to Twyla after that.
So embarrassed that I have not read it. So I'm going to pass and I'm going to go to Twyla.
Well, to be fair, it's your job to like be doing this. So yeah, to be fair.
Thanks, Michelle. But
Yeah.
I didn't get anything. Where was the thing?
Okay, well, that's okay. And I hope I made it really clear. Like I was just joking with Katie that like her job is to facilitate this, not necessarily read the book. So I hope that came out clear. And I apologize if it didn't. So Twyla, we're here to talk about. Well, I guess let's give some background. Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, we did the TRC as our book club, and everybody said, "Hold up, we can't just do 94 calls to action in a 2-hour book club." So what we decided to do was we would read a book, do a section of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You're going to hear me say TRC all the time, and that's what I mean when I say it. And keep rotating from a book to a section of the TRC. So this particular one is the commemoration, so calls to action starting at 79. Now, for those who are like watching and tuning in, calls to action or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report they're public, and you can find them. So I have this tiny little book that you can purchase, and it has the UNDRIP in the back. So UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. And that's kind of the foundation to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And they're in the back of this actually as well. But there's actually more, so you can download it just from any computer. But we also have, oh, I have it right in front of me open, of course. Most people's books probably looks a lot nicer than this one, but this is kind of the summary book that I use on a regular basis. So this summary book is part one of an entire series. And I actually have the entire series because I was gifted it by a wonderful person. So I have in front of me a section of one of the volumes. So I have section 5 here with me, and this one's called, or section 6 called Reconciliation. I have 4, which really focuses on the missing children and unmarked burials, and the summary. I have the Legacy Volume 5 with me. I kind of flipped through all of them to see how they address commemoration, and I actually found that it was volume 6 that really focused in on this conversation. Like there's quite a chapter 5, and you can find that for free online as well. So if you're just tuning in and this is your first time, this is where you would find it. So yeah, thanks, Shelby. So Katie posted the link online. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Sorry, is it okay for me to stay if I haven't read it yet?
The opposite. We encourage you to stay, okay. And I thank you so much. And yeah, we'll just kind of go around and talk about it. And I hope that by the end of it, you feel like you learned something from it and will be inspired to continue reading and continue on with us, I hope.
For sure. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So who's next on the list?
I think it's me. Yeah, so I was looking, so I got this calendar, and in the calendar, it came with a huge chart of the calls to action, and then it color codes them. So I was looking through that, and it was call to action 83, We call upon the Canada Council for the Arts to establish as a funding priority a strategy for Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists to undertake collaborative projects and produce works that contribute to the reconciliation process. And like out of the 5 calls under that heading, that's the only one that's green. And it struck me that's also the one that includes non-Indigenous and getting access to funding to do stuff. So I kind of felt like a little bit weird about it, reading that and seeing all these other monuments that have been said to be proposed that should be made have not been done in all these years. Like, it doesn't take that long to make a monument. So, or yeah, it's still red as like just looking at this. So that was just my kind of superficial initial take on it. And then I'm really interested to hear what other people have to say as well.
Sure. Maybe I'll just quickly clarify that you were looking at the Beyond 94 or on the Government of Canada website.
It's actually it's a pullout. So it's the calls to action in a huge pamphlet. And it was produced, I bought a calendar, Indigenous calendar, and it came in the calendar. So yeah, when I look here, and then it just says, so I think this is information that is from the, like it says it's from the public domain, and then they've taken it in terms of progress and color coded it. Yeah. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, for sure. Kat?
Yes, hello. As mentioned, this section is particularly impactful for me because I am interested in commemoration and public memory, and some of my artwork has looked into that as well. It basically blatantly states that without truth, there cannot be any reconciliation. So I think that's at the point where our country is just still learning the truth. And that must be incredibly frustrating and boring for Indigenous people. And the fact that some of these calls to action haven't even been started yet is super disappointing. But one part that spoke to me on page 278, it is a quote from an honorary witness, Andy Scott. He says, reconciliation is about survivors speaking about their experiences, being hurt and being believed, but it's also about a national shared history. As Canadians, we must be part of reconciling what we have done collectively with who we believe we are. To do that with integrity and to restore our honor, we must all know the history so we can reunite these different Canadas, which would be amazing art projects to do. So yeah, with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. But yes, I'm also super interested in commemoration of residential school victims, people who are buried still at residential school sites. And yeah, we've talked about that in previous book clubs. So any action towards that, I'm in. I want to work on it. And next to Jeremy, I think is next. I can't remember.
Sure. Yeah, so I also kind of got confused about which volume we were working with today. So I mostly just read through the actual calls to action. And I guess what I found interesting was just how straightforward a lot of these were, and yet still have not been done. You know, how hard is it to put up a monument compared to some of these other more structural changes. How hard is it to establish a funding strategy? And it's just, yeah, very disappointing to see that, what is it, one of the ones we're covering today is sort of completed. And I thought there was something in the news recently about this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And I don't know if that was just in Alberta or the federal government, where one of the parties just totally failed to respect that, or that might have been the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I don't remember exactly. But it was just, yeah, very disheartening that not everyone's on board with this for some unexplainable reason. Let's see if I had any other notes. I wrote down a lot of questions that I thought we could discuss, or maybe someone could clarify for me. So, as a white settler, it seems difficult to commemorate these sorts of things without, kind of demanding work or labor from Indigenous people. And I guess that's a difficult thing to navigate for me. I'm not sure how to go about helping without making things worse.
Should we talk about that, or do you want to keep moving and then we'll come back to it if it's not kind of overall answered? I don't know.
Whatever you feel is best. I didn't really have too many more things to say there.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, just coming to these book clubs, like, we had a march on Saturday for awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I'm sad to say we are really low on the awareness scale, and to have folks even come to a book club is a huge, leap and bound for Canadians on the reconciliation scale. So, I think you're doing a lot of good work, and I know what you're doing with the Langevin School conversation. So, I hope that that from my point of view, we'll just keep working together. At least you're not doing this all on your own as a, person who's like, I am going to go do this all by myself. So, I just hope you feel comfortable continuing to doing the work that you're doing as you learn, and asking critical questions to, I don't know, school boards or something like that as you move along. So, yeah, okay. So I had Shelley next, so maybe we'll go with Shelley.
I read because I have the book, the volumes, because I don't like reading off the screen if I can help it. So there was two things that I found. Mark DeWolf talked about his father, and he was very hesitant to talk about his father, and he was defending him. And I thought that whole thing about it's ill to talk about people that have died, and I think we need to scrap that, because people have done bad things. And he was a principal of 2 residential schools that have done horrible things. And we need to be able to speak ill of the dead and not worry about, I guess, karma or something. I don't know, but it's because it was like, just wanted to see the bright side of it. But he was principal for two residential schools. He was obviously aware of what was going on. So that made me kind of mad. And then the second one, it said, unlike more conventional state something, they have the stories tend to be reinforced Canada's story, as told through colonialized residential school commemoration projects, we need to not reinvent the story. We need to tell it through Indigenous eyes, because if we keep, like we said, whitewashing it, I don't think reconciliation will have true impact. We need to talk ill about the dead and what happened. That was my thought.
Well, that sounds great to me, Shelley. So Jeremy and now Rosemary.
Hi. Yeah, I maybe this is my naivete, but I was shocked by the first call, 79, where one of the elements was that the Historic Site and Monument Act needed to be revised so that on the board that oversees these things, there would be Indigenous representation. And I just thought it was so incredible that you could have such a board that would not have had Indigenous representation when we're talking about Canada's history. And it just shows the gap in understanding, I think, that exists in this country. When I, like everyone else, I read the call, I read what progress the government says that it's doing, and very little, and except for that 83, right, the funding through the Canada Council. And so I went on to read some other sites, and the AFN has a watchdog group, actually, which is now reporting on progress. And basically, they came out with something in December 2015 to mark the 5th anniversary of the TRC, saying basically, well, it's been 5.5 years of inactivity. And then there's another group called the Yellowhead Institute, which is an Indigenous-led think tank. They also came out with they come out with reports every year, and they basically said that so far reconciliation has been a process of crocodile tears leading to inaction or blocked action. So I thought those were really important concepts to keep in mind. They also went on to talk about why they feel there's been such a lack of movement on these calls. In total, they think there are only 8 calls that have been completed. And they said, unlike the Beyond 94, they're not willing to say, well, something is in progress. Because usually, and I think they're right when we read what the government says it's actually doing, they're beginning to talk to Indigenous peoples. This is after 5 years, still beginning to talk to Indigenous peoples about many of the issues that are under consideration. So I think those would be good sources for all of us to look at. And I want to go back to the Yellowhead Institute because they have a full-blown report, and they divide the calls between what they call the legacy calls, which cover the areas of like health, education, child welfare, etc., where we need changes and we need structural change to address inequalities. And then they talk about the rest of the calls as they put it under the umbrella of reconciliation, like educating the Canadian public, including Indigenous peoples, etc. And basically, they're saying when you look at the calls, the ones that have been completed, it's very symbolic that it's not substantive in most cases what's been done. And then later, I want to stop talking now, but later I want to come back to the 83 and a very interesting project that came out that was a collaboration between an Indigenous artist and a non-Indigenous artist, Adrian actually, and another artist. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so then I have Heather.
Yeah, so I was tardy getting on this. I bought the book a long time ago and shared it or lost it or something. So I was tardy getting on this. Rosemary, those links were amazing, because I did go into the government page, even though I don't like reading online. So I went into the Beyond 94 page, and then I went into the calls to action page, and then into Beyond 94. But that Yellowhead page sounds really, really exciting. And I think we need to use that for writing our speeches next time for the school board, et cetera, right? We need to pull those, and we can quote them and quote them saying crocodile tears, right? And just say, crocodile tears ain't gonna move us forward to the school board, right? But I know my job here isn't to critique or applaud Rosemary's report, but I was reading it over. I made scanty notes that I can't even make out, other than plan complete, plainly being completely ignored was one. One sidetrack I got onto on the monument page was they for the Museum of Civilization that they changed to the Museum of something else. But anyways, the Museum of Civilization, they made a banner in 2020 with the names of the deceased children, or that they're aware of. 2,800 names on this banner. And they weren't all deceased children. And they put on an archdeacon, bishop, whatever dude, they put on the names of other people that were from somewhere. They didn't even really thoroughly properly edit this before they made this huge 50 feet long red banner with names of the children to honor. I mean, it was cloth. I wouldn't call it a memorial, but someone did that, but they didn't even do it right. And someone looked at it and said, well, this is the deacon and this is the something else. And all those 4 names were only from one school in Sault Ste. Marie. So if there was 4 names from one school in Sault Ste. Marie, how well was the rest of it edited? Like, who thought this one up? So how well was it governed? And so did they rip it down, or what did they do with the banner after that? And then apparently they got the names off of some website, and the article said that the next day one website was changed, but the other one wasn't. So it's just not, teeny tiny footstep forward, not even being done honorably. So anyway, so that was frustrating. So I went and did my laundry instead. And my bad. But anyway, if I can ever get up in time for breakfast again, maybe when my meds are finished this round, I'll have more time in my day.
Sorry, Heather, we can't really hear you.
Maybe if anyway, I'm going to do better day planning. But I like these other resources, because even the 94, Beyond 94 was frustrating. It was just frustrating. So I like the other resources coming up. Thank you, Rosemary. I think Julie was after me.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Heather. I like so much of what everyone's saying. I really appreciate hearing what you're saying. I'm slowly picking away at the TRC recommendations. I find them difficult to read, only in that I don't understand the government world of which they speak, though I know that's really important, because government policy sets so much direction, sets resources. And I think also moving into this nation to nation kind of attitude, it can't be, things need to happen there as well. What I liked about these commemoration ones is they felt, as all the ones that I read do, really, really true to my own little life and what I see happening around me, that this making invisible of Indigenous heritage and history and contemporary life is just such a problem, for those of us settler folks trying to learn differently and be differently and help create something differently. I hear Indigenous people talking about what that means for their children and sense of place. And so I think these things are super important to do, is to have a more truthful history, that shared history, and to dismantle some of the propaganda history that surround us, like the names of schools, the names of bridges, named after kind of either, white folks who are part of terrible systems and made bad choices, or just were the first white person somewhere, and somehow or first white baby, right, born somewhere, as if that's so significant, compared to the eons of history that are actually in our very old land and very old cultured place, so maybe a little differently than what some folks have said. I don't think these things are easy. Maybe sort of building on that example you gave, Heather, of something being done, but done so badly. It was more of an affront than a helpful thing. But I think the process of surfacing stories, of talking about stories and experiences is hard. It's going to be hard. It is hard when it's done, but it's very important to do. It's not hard, we shouldn't do it. It's hard, we should do it, to understand the realities of this place. And like Shelley maybe was saying, I'm also interested in that concept that we're not allowed to talk ill of the dead. I think it feeds into this sense of official history, as much as it's willing in Canada to touch on Indigenous relations and the history of how we got to settle here, those of us who were settlers. It's always seems portrayed as bad things happened, but no one did them. And I just think that's such a problem. It's not just that bad things happened, is that people did them. And that I also really like the alternative histories too, that said that there were settler folks who fought against these bad things as well, who recognized, for example, that residential schools were a horror and were killing children and disrupting families and communities. So as someone who likes to speak out, I like to have those examples. And that gets away from the idea that, it was just of its time, nobody thought any differently. Well, of course, people did. It's always been contested. So I just saw a lot of my own life and concerns and things that worry me in these commemoration recommendations, and I was very happy to read them. Oops, that's what I would like to say. And now I pass on to Shelby.
Hi. Yeah, unfortunately, I just got notified of this book club, but I got off the wait list, so I wasn't able to get the reading list for today in advance. But I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, and I really value being able to hear all your thoughts on this. So thank you.
Oh, I'm grateful. So for both you and Twyla, like I hope as we kind of go around, and Katie for that matter too, as you hear things, like feel free to know that your opinion is going to be valid in the context of the conversation. And no, Jeremy, you've had your hand up and we kind of went around a circle. So I just wanted to double check and make sure that we've addressed it.
If everyone else has had their say, I did have a quick question or comment. Okay, so it relates to this tracking of the progress on the different calls to action. So for example, we heard about the Yellowhead Institute Beyond 94, which is that a CBC thing, I think? And then, of course, you got the Crown Indigenous Relations pages that are just straight from the federal government. And then there's this page I recently found called indigenouswatchdog.org. And then as well as the AFN has some documents that they put out. And I guess I'm just curious, which of these are perhaps the most appropriate, least colonial sources to refer to?
Sure. Well, Beyond 94, I think, is the nice bubblegum Canadian standard. Like, these are Indigenous reporters that are funded by Canada. So I don't know about you, but I know I never put down my boss. and I certainly don't put down the people who are paying my wage. You know, and I think that that's why it's always been really critical that I don't work for certain institutions, because I can't speak about the problems within them as an Indigenous person, unless I want to lose my job and lose my livelihood, right? So that's kind of like the Beyond 94. Like, so for example, for folks who are brand new to racism and Indigenous issues, I will kind of put them towards this one. But like, I believe that the whole reason why the Yellow Hood Institute was even founded was, you know, when Harper was in you know, the world, it was really awful. But then when Justin became prime minister, I think it was really painfully obvious he needed some serious accountability, and that's the impetus for them to do that. So I think it's really important that we you know, because everyone in this book club has kind of read a lot of this stuff. They know that the Yellowhead Institute, like, will talk about some severe issues without, like, they're not funded by, so they can talk about this openly. So I would just wanted to bring this up for folks to kind of see it. This is the one that I prefer people would go to, is the Yellowhead Institute. The other one that you talked about, can I grab the name one more time?
Sure, I just put it in the chat. It's indigenouswatchdog.org.
Indigenous Watchdog. I wonder if it's like for like Australia. Oh, calls to action. I should have clicked on that first. That looks pretty Canadian.
Yeah, I just recently discovered this one. I think it's still under construction, possibly.
Oh, okay. Let's have a look here.
I think it's the AFN.
Oh, this is the AFN.
This looks familiar to me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's do the about. We'll have a quick look. Who is behind it? Let's see. So even the AFN, like, if you were to listen to Russ Diabo, he's like, these people are the worst. So we have to be careful who's even behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Member of Pegasus First Nation. Well, at least he's Indigenous. And, you know, oh, it sounds like he would be, oh, Assembly of First Nation. Support for the Indigenous Watchdog. Okay, so we have a few different funders, and it's kind of headed through the AFN. So to be frank, then I know that there would probably be a lot of political direction onto how this is put forward. And Calgary Foundation, Toronto Foundation, Canada, like, these are colonial institutions with grantings that are colonial, granting systems that are so colonial that you have to really know how to work within that organization. So, you know, like, I'm glad that they have this, but a lot of people think AFN is kind of a, you know, like I was talking about CBC Beyond 94, where it's like you're directly paid from the government with government direction. And then this is kind of like that, because the AFN, for the folks who don't know, is still the Indian Act. So the, you know, government of Canada still controls everything, and they don't get to be like actual leaders, like Russ Diabo and Derek Nipanak. He's no longer a chief. So like, when they speak, it's not coming from a place of this person's funding me. It's coming from a place of honesty. So, you know, so this would probably be like 94 and beyond, then this one, and then Yellowhead Institute. That's how, and I just personally go to the Yellowhead Institute. There's another one that I really like, and there it is. First People's Law. They're a really good group of people to follow too. Oh, I think I had a dog help me find my book once. And they're online, and they tweet out. So I follow them. Basically a bunch of lawyers, Indigenous lawyers, that talk about it from an Indigenous perspective. So First People's Law, Yellowhead Institute, those would be organizations that I would trust to be like really holding them accountable. Whereas Beyond 94 is just kind of a nicety to see what the government thinks it's done. And that's part of the reason why I go there, is to be like, okay, I'm a poli-sci degree graduate, and I work for Justin Trudeau. So how do I spin this to make it look as great as possible? that's what Beyond 94 is, and all of this, right? So that's why I go to the Yellowhead Institute, because they will, like, you know, throw off the boxing gloves and just go full knuckle. So anyway, I really liked what they said here. 5 reasons why we have a lack of action.
Yeah, it's
Exclusion of
excellent.
Indigenous people. How many times have the people on this call have, like, not had proper Indigenous consultation, or there be such a power dynamic? I've been in rooms where there's like 50 people and I'm the only Indigenous person. You know, it's so incredible. Deep-rooted paternalistic attitudes, you know, yeah, that's an understatement. And I think it was Jeremy was bringing up the conversation that was happening from the Conservative Party. They're basically in denial of reconciliation, so they didn't want to commemorate the National Day of Reconciliation as September 30th, and that's pretty bad. I mean, there's some pretty low-hanging fruit, and that would have definitely been one that they could have been, okay, totally on board. Now, we've had previous discussions about the missing children and the unmarked burial sites. Like, that's going to be a fight. Like, hey, you're farming on top of, you know, 20 Indigenous kids. We need this land back. That's going to be its own conversation, right? I don't know if it's going to happen. The Red Deer one specifically. I always think of the Red Deer one, but then my Dunbow experience is really, it really scared me. I really felt like this was a farmer that was willing to shoot someone on site, even though I was in his driveway trying to engage with him in a constructive way. So this is like the type of stuff that's going to be the hard conversation. So let's bring this back a little more to the actual calls to action of commemoration. So I had shown that today was going to be 79 to 83. Those were the ones. And when I went through more specifically the Reconciliation Volume 6, like, this was a really beautiful chapter of Chapter 5. So it kind of lays out that question of, you know, where do I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? Who am I? And children need to know their personal story, including parts of their, you know, parts that precede their birth. How do we even have the conversation of how hard it is as an Indigenous person to reclaim their culture? Katie, I don't want to speak for you, but when you said that your mom was Métis, to me, I automatically went, oh, then she's Métis, but she doesn't know who she is. And the reason why is because you didn't say I am Métis. You said your mom's family was Métis.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, my mom was adopted in rural Manitoba, and she was one of, I think he has 2 brothers and a sister, and they were basically adopted to be farmhands on our adopted parents' land. And it wasn't until my mom was in her 20s and 30s that she started to try to even learn about her birth family. And she finally found, I think she reached out to her birth mother a few times, who was at that point in Ontario, and then found out that she'd passed away. And then she found out that she had 2 half brothers who she was a little bit in touch with here and there. But she sort of went on this whole journey, I think, and I feel like I didn't realize until I was much older how much of an impact it must have had on her just identity in her whole life. And yeah, so I think she wrote a thesis on Métis identity, and I don't know, like, I think she's still working on it or working through it. So, and I feel really kind of ashamed, because I feel like she's carrying that burden for me, and it's not something that I really think about. It's not something that I've had to deal with, because I don't look Indigenous. My father's side was like completely settler from Germany, so it's not a world that I grew up in. But yeah, it's very much shaped her identity.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I'd love to have a conversation with you one-on-one offline, so that you say, I'm Métis and this means this to me. Because just because your dad is German doesn't make you less Métis, and it doesn't make the intergenerational trauma or culture go away in your DNA. So, hopefully one day we can have that conversation offline if and when you ever want to. And I extend my my phone number, my email to have that conversation when and if you ever want to. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, like this, honestly, this is the conversation that we need to have, is that because of the great genocide policy that they had, we have Indigenous people not feeling comfortable identifying as Indigenous. And I say that myself as a status Native. Um, I every day deal with imposter syndrome every single day, because of a culture that was purposely taken from me. But then because I'm not who I, because I don't fit, then I experience racism, and I've experienced lots of government policy racism as well. So there's multi layers of racism. And then when you read social media, there's so much racism, and so many people are so conditioned to it, they don't even see the racism. So, like, when we talk about children need to know their personal story, I don't know if this ever ends. I don't think that the healing journey ever ends, because just as I walk down another rabbit hole, I have to mourn a bigger picture of something different, whether it was the loss of language. Like, I remember sitting at Jeremy Dutcher's concert, and I started bawling uncontrollably because I was hearing recordings of 200-year-old songs that have been, stolen from me on purpose, so that we can all sit here and talk in English rather than in Blackfoot. And that's really problematic. And the trauma and the impact of that, you know, personal story that people are unaware of, even to this day, I'm still trying to figure out who I really am and where I really come from, because Indian residential schools relocated my own family. So it's, even with the opening statements on this, they were tough. And then it talked a bit, there was a really great quote here. They had a conversation about the national event in Edmonton, which I was actually at. And it's interesting because a lot of these quotes that I've seen throughout all of these volumes that we've worked on, I don't, like, I wasn't present when some of these incredibly impactful words were even spoken. So anyway, the first few pages are testimonials and the damage done of, being apprehended or going through this Indian residential school, having your culture stolen, trying to figure out where you belong, trying to reclaim who you are, trying to work through media misrepresentation. It's a fabulous few pages to read if you get there. Then it broke into the dialogue, ceremony, testimony, and witnessing. And then it talked about the power of ceremony. So for a lot of Indigenous people, they haven't been exposed to that, and that's on purpose, so that Canadians can drink their Timmies and watch hockey and be happy people at the expense of a complete loss and erasure of people and our culture. Life stories, testimonies, and witnessing as teachings. Um, these are actually kind of hard reads, but I really encourage people to do that. Then they had a section of former residential school staff and their families. And I think that, especially for a lot of the work that we're trying to do with the Langevin, like, this is a great example of what reconciliation can look like. A number of former residential school staff came to the commission to speak out not only about their perspectives of the time that they spent in the schools, but also their struggles to come to terms with their own past. Florence Caffeyer, former teacher, spoke at the Manitoba event. And from my English ancestors, I apologize today for what my people did to you. I taught in two residential schools. In 1954, I taught at Norway House United Church Residential School for 3 to 4 years. And then I taught in Alberni United Church Indian Residential School in BC. And I worked very hard to be the best teacher I could be, and did not know about the violence and cruelty going on in the dorms and in the playrooms. I have found out through one of my former students who was only 5 years old when he came to Norway House, and his name is Edward Gamblin. And Edward Gamblin and I have gone through a personal truth and reconciliation. And then afterwards in the media, hearing his songs a few years ago describe the cultural, physical, and sexual abuse he had suffered in Norway school, she said, I just cried. I told my sister I can never think of teaching in a residential school in the same way again. And she called Gamblin after hearing the song. He told her he had to hide his abuse from the good teachers for fear he would lose them if they found out what was happening and left. He invited Kiefer to a healing circle in 2006, and they became close friends. Kiefer and Gamblin taught her not to be embarrassed about her past, being part of a school which abuse took place. I was 19, and you don't question your church and your government when you're 19. But I certainly question my church and my government today. Understatement of the year. And Gamblin said Kiefer taught him how to forgive. There are good people, teachers, who don't deserve to be labeled. So I just thought that was relevant in some of the conversations that a lot of the folks here have been having, and that, as all Calgarians should be, about something like Langevin School, the John A. Macdonald schools, things like this that we're trying to have dialogue on. Then it goes into church and government officials and the TRC honorary witness. And, you know, Jeremy, kind of go back to what you were asking about, you know, in a lot of ways, I feel like the folks in this book club, folks in some of the work that we've done outside the book club has helped to show that you are witnesses to my experience and my example, let alone all of the other Indigenous people that might be in your life. And, you know, we talked a little about Adrian Stimson, since he's a rock star artist that everyone in the circle knows of. And, you know, when he tells his story to you all, you're honoring that story. You're honoring what he has to say. And you are that honorary witness. And when I talk about walking this journey with you all, you are walking the journey. You get to see the hate mail we get to see the comments that come, you get to witness that. And you have a choice from that witnessing to either perpetuate it and continue it. And I know nobody here does, but that bigger picture, right? So, and anyway, so the honorary witnesses that are in the TRC report. But I remember when I was at the Edmonton event, them talking about basically how I felt at the time was they made like white social workers and white politicians and all these people be like, you're hearing this trauma and now you have the responsibility to move forward and tell these stories. And they knew that was their job. They knew it was their job to continue talking about this and try to make rights for what had happened. So, you know, I always encourage people when they hear Indigenous people to not just believe them, but honor that story and be a witness to that and walk that journey with them. So, and that was quite a few pages long, and they're hard reads, but it's important to hear people talk about what it's like. And I think our book club specifically, because we have so many settlers, would really relate to a lot of that. But also in this group are a lot of artists. So the arts, practicing resistance, healing, and reconciliation. And, you know, I thought that that would be really a critical section to read as we kind of talk about Langevin School and talk about possible art that we put towards this. It's so funny because we had a bit of a conversation about funding. You are actually doing the action, the call to action, by trying to do things like get schools renamed or statues to not be put up. And the guidelines are right here on page 178 and 9. They're right here. So, you know, it's just encouraging folks to know where to look, I think. And then they can look and they know to go, oh, well, I go to this volume in here and it says this, and, you know, understanding the gravity of it. Because like some of the comments we've been getting about the Langevin School rename are like, well, that's not a call to action. No, but if you were to read the Reconciliation Volume 6 and you were to read some of this, would you really feel comfortable looking at me as a person impacted by Indian residential school and saying, well, it's not a call to action, so we can't possibly do it. It's not near the spirit of reconciliation that we're trying to achieve, right? So really recommend this part, especially with the work that I know some of you are trying to do outside of the circle. And then the residential school commemorative projects. Yeah, that's something I would like to do. I should just share a quick story that my family's school that they went to had a memorial put up prior to the TRC. So the language is very whitewashed. And I would love to see another monument go up that isn't, that's honest, right? Like they have all these unmarked graves right there. I mean, everyone knows they're just not allowed to, develop it at all. And that's not really okay. We should have them properly marked. Bearing witness to the child, children's art from Alberni Residential School. The story of a small collection of children's art created at the Alberni Residential School demonstrates how recognizing and respecting Indigenous protocols, practices of ceremony, testimony, and witnesses can breathe life, healing, and transformation into public memory, making through dialogue, the arts, and commemoration. The story has deep roots within the family's histories of the survivors and the oral history and the community memory of the peoples that are there. So I strongly encourage people to read that. There's over 750 pages or paintings in the collection, including the 36 paintings from the residential school itself. It's just a really great chapter to read. It's not even a chapter. It's 1, 2, 3 pages. Canada's public commemoration. So they talk a little here with ceremonies. Christy Belcourt, one of the folks that did the Walking with Our Sisters exhibit. She's not talking about that in here, but she talks a bit from the Métis perspective, and there is a Métis TRC book. What time do we got? I bet you I'm running out of time here. Okay, we got 15 minutes. So I'm going to do a circle, kind of a closing circle for us, and just really strongly encourage the Reconciliation Volume 6 for us all. And we'll start with Katie, and I will shut up here for a moment. Where was my mute there?
I don't know what you want me to say, Michelle. Sorry.
I guess maybe that's unfair, and I apologize for that. We only have 15 minutes, so I just wanted to ask you, recognizing there's other folks, maybe some burning things that you might want to share that you learned from tonight, and then we'll just pass it on to the other folks, and just kind of do a decompress.
I don't even know where to start, honestly. This is a lot of stuff that I haven't thought about in a really long time. So I think I'll pass on to the next person, but I'm so glad that I randomly was assigned to host this book group. I think it was meant to be. So anyways, I'll pass it on to the next person that I can see or who's next to me, which is Crystal.
Thanks everyone. I really appreciate hearing all the comments and especially the in-depth stories too. I guess what I think, as a teacher, when I see we've made these goals and they're not done. So if I was with students, I'd say, okay, well, obviously we have to go back and make these smaller baby steps so that you can get to whatever level. When you show those 5 items of what's happening, and those are the previous steps that have to happen for these other things to come. Yeah, but thanks. Twyla, I'll go to you.
So I've got a lot of reading to do, but I'm thankful for all the links that were shared and everything, and I've made all my notes, so I've got lots to do, and I'm gonna do it. So thank you. Jeremy would be next.
Sure. Shelley, do you have your hand up?
No, I'm trying to, no, I have a aneurysm thrombosis in my hand, so I'm on a lot of drugs and I'm very uncomfortable. I'm trying to make my hand comfortable. Sorry.
No, no problem. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't skipping over you. Yes, thank you everyone today for sharing your thoughts and for being here together. I also have a lot more reading to do. It's one thing to go through the calls to action, but as Michelle kind of summarized, there's so much more to it. The spirit behind those calls to action. And one thing that came to mind as I was, following along there is just lately I've found myself having not much time to read, but more time to listen to audiobooks. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's an audiobook version of the reports.
I wish there were.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's like a volunteer project maybe to do that, or who would be appropriate to ask for that approval or consent. Because I think that's something that maybe some of us would be interested in doing.
I would just do it because I'm like that. But
Well,
actually, if you follow the Canadian colonial route, I guarantee there's funding for something like that.
I suppose, yeah. I know that there's like this bookshouldbefree.org, I think, that has, a lot of recordings that have been made like that just by volunteers. I did a quick Google search and found these two links that I just put in the chat. The second link is like a set of Dropbox files. I think that somehow are summaries of some of the TRC report chapters. I haven't listened to them yet, but that might be a resource.
Just a reminder that Beyond 94 does have like those little videos that have like Murray Sinclair just saying the TRC call to action. But I know you're trying to talk about that bigger picture of like the book and the volumes, and I don't blame you.
The 700 pages, yeah, with all that beautiful text. So, well, if you think that it would be okay, then maybe that's something I'll work on in my spare time. And yes, thank you everyone for being here. I guess I have to call on someone else now. Shelley, I suppose.
Hello. When I was reading this, what really, and it's come back to further conversations we've had in this book club, is that the schools aren't marked National Historic Sites, which really got me, and they're being sold to private farmers. They shouldn't be. I felt sad and anger at the same time. They should not be wiped under the carpet. They should be brought out and taught. And it's just so frustrating. People don't want to talk about history. Like, they don't want to talk about the forced sterilization of Indigenous women and people with disabilities, and that they're still doing it. And that, the act of and the genocide that's still happening, and all the intersectionalities. Sorry, I could go on forever, but I just think that I find it really good to read the actual volumes. I've read 5 and 6, and now I have to go back and read the other ones. But that's all I'm really doing right now, is reading and watching TV, because I'm in so much pain. But that's all I'm really doing. Oh, I need to pick someone else. I will pick Kat.
Well, I hope you feel better soon, Shelley. Sending you positive energy for that. And I'm honored to be here, as always. And I would encourage, if you have some extra time, to go check out some Indigenous artists. There's the exhibition that's listed in the calls here, Witnesses, Art in Canada's Indian Residential Schools, from UBC. It was shown, I think, in 2015. And Speaking to Memory, Images and Voices from the St. Michael's Residential School. Those are just two small examples of Indigenous artists who've addressed the issues of residential schools. And there are tons of other ones out there making beautiful art. Adrian Stimson was in the Witness exhibition too. So yeah, thank you all. I'm so grateful to hear you and learn from you. And Michelle, mwah, mwah, I send you tons of positive energy too for all your good work, and it is very much appreciated.
All right,
Sorry,
did we miss anybody? Okay.
Rosemary.
Okay, very, very quickly. I don't think it's speaking ill of the dead to speak truth. We would never say we're speaking ill of the dead when we talk about Hitler and what he did. So why can't we think the same way when it comes to what happened, is still happening to Indigenous peoples? Two, and this is something we can talk about again, they keep talking about including Indigenous perspectives, right, in some of these historic sites and monuments. And we're going to have to really guard against the government or whoever interpreting that to mean that somehow there are two sides to the story. I was in a conference today where someone was saying, you know, it's not about two sides. They said it's about the truth of what happened. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Number three, Google Adrian Stimson and the Apology Project. This was a collaborative work in the 2019 Toronto Biennale. He collaborated with a legendary performance artist, A.A. Bronson, who's in his 70s. And Bronson basically delivered an apology, like they created all kinds of stuff. And the part of it was Bronson, not in his persona as a performance artist, but as a human being, apologizing for his family's role in residential schools. And his great-grandfather was Reverend Timms, the Anglican reverend who built the Old Sun boarding school for boys. And Old Sun was the name of Adrian's great-grandfather. So it's just such an interesting article. So I encourage everyone to read it, Google it and read it. And yeah, Michelle, thank you. I feel like through these book clubs and the discussions, you've given us the tools we need to try and act, right? And to do things, to challenge anti-Indigenous racism and white supremacy. Thank you.
Really happy. So it's 7:56. We usually try to give everybody some time to chat. I don't mind staying a little later, but I respect everybody's time. And I also respect that Katie, like we're done at 8 o'clock. So I thank you all for coming. I don't know if you've seen in the chat, but I had in the chat our next book club. So the 12th is Mama Sketch by Daryl McLeod, and that is one that the library can get. And then the next one after that will be the TRC on media. And there's actually really great books that are on media and misrepresentation. I think of like Lisa Charlie Horse immediately. And those are books that you can get through the public library. So it might be ones you might want to consider when, you know, because they are kind of graphic novels. So there's something actually fun to read. I actually think we did it like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We're about to have our 5th anniversary, so I think we did it, but we can, you know, revisit them if you want to, or at least I encourage you to consider it if you're making an order at the library to get Mama Sketch, that maybe you could have a look at some of Lisa Charlie Horse's work as well. So we have 3 minutes and Jeremy raises his hand.
I'm just curious about getting this from the library. I see there are 18 copies or 12 available. Does that mean we can all get one and that's fine, or should?
Just taking a look here. Yeah, there's There's 12 available copies. It also is available via ebook, if that interests anybody. But yeah, I think that's everybody who wants one should be able to get one.
Awesome.
I did want to mention too, are any of you folks on the wait list for next month that you know of? No? Okay. Because I think we will be opening it up to a few more folks.
Good.
Yes, and apologies to anyone who got an email from me earlier today letting you in. Our librarian had meant to reach out a few weeks ago and obviously give you enough time to read everything and contribute. So that I'll be reaching out to people next week to make sure that everybody gets a book and gets the links and everything that they need. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, folks, we're at 7:59. Thank you so much for coming and for having this conversation, and don't hesitate to reach out.